this is Vincenzo from A Place of Safety podcast. So I'm doing this video as a response to some points that Daisies_B was making on Twitter. So since he made a range of points, I wanted to go through them one by one because it's very difficult to answer on Twitter in a way that is complete, in a way that really answers the questions. So the first issue was related to the fact that you were saying yes, hospital admissions for suicidal people, you could see how it could be avoided, but not so much when we're talking about people that are dangerous to others. And you're saying, well, should we not how are we going to avoid the fact that in terms of legislation we should protect society from dangerous people? Now, obviously, this is something that happens in every psychiatric hospital system, basically, that the criteria more or less for detaining people is that they're dangerous to others. The difference with Italy, since you were mentioning this, is that in Italy you get admitted because you need urgent help and you refuse it. Now that's questionable in itself. We could talk about that, and we talked about it a lot in the podcast. But the bottom line is that when we talk about dangerousness, we are already making a choice. So when you ask, well, what about dangerous people? What about dangerous behavior, or even worse, dangerous people? When you ask that question, you are seeing only dangerousness as the only thing that is happening there. So this denies both the entire experience of the person that is dangerous. So what are they experiencing in this situation? And it denies any other thing that you might be able to see in that situation beyond dangerousness. The entire situation becomes the behavior is dangerous, or worse, the person is dangerous. Now, if you want to try and help this person without coercion, and that's your approach, obviously it's going to be impossible, because the only options that description gives you, dangerous, is a repressive approach. What do you do with a dangerous person with a danger? You try to get rid of the danger to repress the danger. If you start seeing that this person is struggling, is angry, and there's a range of reasons that may be rather complex why this person is angry, when you're relating to this person, you start having other options on how to communicate without violence. Now that's the first thing, but that I would say. The second thing that I would say is that dangerousness happens within a context. So if you have a locked environment, as I said many times, that is strongly based on suspicion, so you're constantly asking the person, oh, do you have thoughts of hurting people? Do you have plans to end your life? And you're basically implicitly saying, there's a repressive answer if you say, yes, actually, I don't know if I'll be alive next week. You're implicitly also encouraging the person not to be open. Now that creates a huge problem in communication, which in turn can exasperate people. So if you have an open environment where you're trying to reach out to the other person, in itself, that's going to reduce the level of dangerousness, because you're starting to see other aspects in experience other than danger, which is a very stigmatizing view, and it's the basic view of the psychiatric hospital system, that human experience, intense human experience, can only be understood in terms of risk. And that's where the risk management culture kicks in. There's an episode that we did, I think one of the most important, episode 2, on the podcast. So anybody who's listening and hasn't listened to that podcast, is quite a relevant podcast. And we went into detail as to what happens when you only see dangerousness in a behavior. What type of repercussions this can have on the overall picture, and why that's not a good idea, why the risk management culture is essentially flawed. Now you say, why is it that in Italy, this is what you say, in Italy people get offended when you use that term. I believe the term you're talking about is dangerousness or dangerous. Why do people get offended? Because it's just the tip of the iceberg, and you're only seeing the stigmatizing aspect of an incredibly complex picture. When somebody's really angry, really frustrated, God knows what's happening, all you can see is dangerousness. That in itself escalates things, but it's a way of seeing things that is very stigmatizing, I think, at least from a Basalian perspective, let's say. So then you say, well, are crisis teams effective because there's a lower suicide rate in inpatient settings. So in the psychiatric hospital ward, there's less suicides than people that are under crisis teams. Now, I've never thought that the problem is where people end their lives. But this is another thing. This is the typical thing of the psychiatric hospital ward. The mentality behind the ligature points. There shouldn't be ligature points. You need to have the cameras controlling everything. That we don't want anything bad to happen on the ward. And what happens is the person says, well, I'm fine now. I want to go home. Then they go home and they do it there. And that's not a success, in my opinion. To me, it's relevant where the people end their life. The issue is we don't want people to end their lives. We want people to feel better. So the fact that there's more or less suicides in the ward is a secondary point, in my opinion. Regarding the crisis team is based on risk management. So that's the mentality. So you assess the level of risk, and if the level of risk is high, you go down a repressive route, which might be a terrible decision. But if you're just looking at things from a risk perspective, that's what's going to happen. They're not relational, holistic services generally. So then you're asking me my opinion on euthanasia. Or euthanasia, I don't know. So this is a very difficult question. I don't know if there's a right or wrong answer to this. I think we all have our ethical principles, and it's difficult to know where they originate. Even my personal view is that society has a duty to do everything it can to help somebody who's struggling to live, to improve their life. And I think that if that fails, and if the person is really determined that they want to end their life, definitely, I find it difficult to see how justifiable it is that I would put in place limits based on my decision that a person has to live. I think that people have the right to end their life ultimately, but I think that we have a duty to do everything we can to help the person before we get to that point. But obviously it's a difficult issue. It's not as if it's straightforward in my mind. But I tend to believe that people have the right to end their life. But we don't have the right to just say, oh, then whatever, we'll just not do anything to help people. We'll just let them die. Society needs to do a lot to support people. I don't think a lot in terms of violence to prevent people, though. That's where the limit is for me. So yeah, that's. I hope I answered some of the questions, and feel free, anybody, to comment and to let me know what you think. And listen to the podcast. Listen to episode 2 and to all of the other episodes. Thank you. Bye bye. Oh, another thing that I forgot. When we're talking, another thing that Daisy, you were saying is, oh, in Italy there are secure units. So why people are offended about the term dangerousness. So forensic psychiatric hospitals have been closed recently in Italy, but they've been changed with a kind of smaller psychiatric hospitals, kind of. I've never really understood what happened exactly in terms of forensic mental health care in Italy. Is more complex. There's people that know much more than I do. I've heard that is not that part of psychiatry is not particularly Basalian, although it kind of tried to be. But you see, the bottom line is when you say secure unit, that's laughable, because I don't think there's any safety in psychiatric hospitals. I think that that the whole idea of safety is, in the way psychiatric hospitals see safety, has been questioned on this podcast since the beginning, and that's why, since it's a complex issue, it took us many episodes to explain this. But fundamentally, I don't believe that a secure place is a place where people are locked up, restrained, assaulted, and all the rest. Anyway, thank you. Bye bye.